On an August night in 2020, as the streets of New York City sat totally silent, an elderly man knelt alone in the center of his dark apartment. To the public, pundit Aryavesh was the emperor of melody. He was a living deity of Indian classical music, a man whose flawless performances could command absolute silence in the grandest halls on earth. But resting on the floor in front of him was a small locked wooden chest he hadn't let anyone touch for decades. Inside lay a collection of yellowed diaries and unfinished letters, mapping out a private life consumed by an agonizing, unbroken silence. The documents inside that box suggest a different story behind the music. They offer a map of the silence that existed behind every perfect note, a secret history that forced him to keep a distance even from those who loved him most. His story begins far from the bright lights of international stages, in the extreme poverty and choking dust of Mewat in the 1930s. As a child, Aryavesh actively hated music. His father sang constantly to cope with their grim reality, and when his father died, the young boy resented the art form that seemed to have consumed his family. It took a wandering master, Guru Vasudev, to break through that hatred. Vasudev initiated the reluctant boy into Drupad, the oldest, most ancient form of Hindustani classical music. The core philosophy of Drupad demands total structural rigidity. As we see mapped out here, the music acts as an unyielding pillar. The artist is expected to hurl their own ego against the structure until every trace of their individual identity dissolves. This forged his foundational understanding of his craft. He learned that true art required the complete and total suppression of his personal identity. That rigid discipline held until 1952, when he traveled to the narrow streets of Braj and heard a local folk singer named Radha. Radha sang without rules, guided only by raw feeling. When they began practicing together, her emotion breathed actual life into his strict technique, sparking a deep and immediate romance between them. When Guru Vasudev discovered the relationship, he delivered a brutal ultimatum. Aryavesh had to choose between his path to musical greatness or his love for the girl. The discipline of his lineage permitted no compromise. Faced with losing his art, Aryavesh made a cowardly choice. He chose ambition, walking away from Braj and leaving Radha to die in heartbreak and isolation. This was his original sin. It is the exact moment he purchased his future greatness with his own humanity. Aryavesh ascended from a village student to a revered master, dominating the elite musical courts of Delhi and eventually stepping onto the world stage. To maintain this momentum, he made a strategic technical shift. He moved away from the severe, unyielding style of Drupad and adopted the highly flexible, innovative form known as Khyal. Unlike his rigid early training, Khyal's rules allow the artist to bend the structure. It invites improvisation, letting the singer weave personal emotion into the performance. Aryavesh used these complex melodies to funnel his crippling grief over abandoning Radha, hiding it in plain sight. Critics praised his incredible innovation and depth of feeling. In reality, his legendary technique was a disguise for his unforgivable personal sorrow. By the 1980s, his career reached its absolute peak. He received deafening standing ovations in the most prestigious venues on Earth, from London's Royal Albert Hall to New York's Lincoln Center. Yet a grim paradox took hold of his life. The louder the massive crowds cheered his name, the more isolated and hollow he felt when he returned to his empty hotel rooms. The guilt began to manifest physically. During his performances, he started suffering from a terrifying hallucination. Staring out into the sea of people, he would see the silent shadow of Radha. She never applauded. His existence fractured. His absolute, celebrated perfection on the stage only served to highlight his absolute failure as a human being. Only one person ever suspected the truth. A woman named Urmila began writing him letters, quietly noting that she recognized a profound lived pain hidden within his flawless notes. In his secret replies to her, the facade finally cracked. He confessed that he was no god of music. Off the stage, he admitted, he was merely a defeated father. Which brings us back to that dark New York apartment in 2020. The silence of the room was broken by a soft knock on the door. Aryavesh opened it to find a 50-year-old stranger with cold, steady eyes. The stranger placed an old photograph on the table and revealed his identity. He was Aryavesh's unacknowledged, secret son with Radha. The past had finally arrived to collect its debt. The son offered no forgiveness. He delivered one crushing accusation before walking out. Every single musical victory Aryavesh ever claimed was funded entirely by the defeat and abandonment of his own family. Sitting alone after the man left, Aryavesh's ego completely collapsed. He understood finally that preserving his musical tradition had cost him his soul. In a final act of defiance against his own myth, he took out a pen and rewrote his will. He stripped away his public legacy, leaving everything he had to the people he wronged: Urmila, Radha's surviving family, and his son. As morning approached, he picked up his tampura in the dim light. He closed his eyes and began to sing Raga by Ravi one last time. This performance required no projection, no stagecraft, and no masks. Without a crowd to satisfy or a legacy to defend, the music became a raw, unadorned apology. In that final hour, his musical notes carried his desperate plea for forgiveness, and the silence hanging between those notes carried his lifelong regret. Aryavesh passed away shortly after. Weeks later, the physical remnants of his life arrived at the banks of the Ganges in Varanasi. Standing quietly by the water, Urmila and his son tilted an urn, scattering his ashes and finally washing away the manufactured myth of the Emperor of Melody. The river answers the haunting question at the center of his life. Masterful art possesses the power to make a person immortal, but it has no power to wash away their mortal sins. Aryavesh left behind a melody that remains forever incomplete, an echo that finally sounds human.